You've been told to ride slow and long to get faster, but here's the truth. That advice was built for pro cyclists training 20 hours a week, not for you. If you're squeezing in rides between work, family, and life and still not seeing gains, it's not because you're not training hard enough. It's because you've been following a system that was never designed for busy cyclists. We've seen it over and over. Riders grinding out Zone 2 sessions, thinking they're building endurance, but staying stuck at the same FTP for months. That ends today. I'm gonna show you a smarter, science-backed way to build your aerobic base in just 4 to 6 hours a week. And this isn't just theory. One of our clients, a dad of 2 with a 50-hour work week, gained 23 watts in 8 weeks using this method. If you're over 40, short on time, and tired of not seeing results, this is the system you've been waiting for. Let's fix your base training and unlock gains you thought were impossible. Let's start by understanding what base training actually is and why it matters so much. Your aerobic base is the foundation of all cycling performance. It's your body's ability to produce energy using oxygen, and it powers everything from long endurance rides to recovery between hard efforts. When you build your aerobic base, you're creating specific physiological adaptations that transform how your body produces energy. Your capillaries multiply, delivering more oxygen to your muscles. Your mitochondria, the powerhouses in your cells, increase in both number and efficiency. Your heart becomes stronger, pumping more blood with each beat, and your body gets better at using fat as fuel, sparing precious glycogen stores. But here's where most cyclists go wrong. They assume that building this aerobic base requires endless hours of slow riding, what coaches call long slow distance, or LSD training. This approach comes from professional cyclists who can ride 20 to 30 hours per week during their base phase. The problem? You don't have that kind of time. You have a job, family, and other commitments. If you try to follow a pro's base training plan with a busy person's schedule, you'll fall dramatically short of the volume needed to create those adaptations. This is where the conflict arises. Traditional base training wisdom says you need high volume at low intensity, but your real-world schedule says you have limited hours to train. So what's the solution? And by the way, if you want to build your aerobic base without figuring it all out on your own, you can book a free strategy call with our coaching team using the first link below. We'll analyze your current fitness and create a personalized base training plan that fits your schedule and goals. Now, let's get back to solving the base training dilemma for busy cyclists. The answer lies in what exercise scientists call sweet spot training. This approach targets a specific intensity zone that creates many of the same aerobic adaptations as traditional base training, but in significantly less time. The sweet spot is a narrow power zone between tempo and threshold, typically around 88 to 94% of your FTP or functional threshold power. This zone is intense enough to create strong aerobic adaptations, but not so intense that it creates excessive fatigue or requires long recovery. Think of it as the Goldilocks zone of training. Not too easy, not too hard, but just right for maximum adaptation with minimum time investment. But wait, you might be thinking, isn't any high intensity work during base phase a mistake? Won't I peak too early or burn out? This is one of the biggest myths in cycling training. The research actually shows the opposite. A landmark study of elite endurance athletes found that they all incorporated some higher intensity work even during their base phases. None of them did exclusively slow riding. The key is in the distribution. The most effective approach is what scientists call polarized training, where about 80% of your training time is spent at low intensity, true Zone 2, and about 20% is spent at higher intensities like sweet spot or threshold. This 80-20 distribution creates the perfect balance of stress and recovery to build your aerobic engine without burning out. The low intensity work builds endurance and fat metabolism, while the higher intensity work stimulates additional adaptations that pure slow riding misses. So what does this look like in practice for a busy cyclist? Let's break down how to implement this modern approach to base training when you only have 4 to 6 hours available each week. First, you need to determine your training zones accurately. The most reliable way is through a proper FTP test, or better yet, a lactate threshold test with a sports physiologist. But a good estimate is that your sweet spot zone is an effort where you can speak in short sentences but not hold a conversation. On a scale of 1 to 10, it feels like a 7 to 8. Next, structure your week to include both low-intensity endurance rides and targeted sweet spot sessions. For a cyclist with 6 hours available per week, here's what an effective base-building week might look like. I will let you take a screenshot. This structure gives you about 4 to 5 hours of focused training per week, with about 80% in Zone 2 and 20% at sweet spot intensity. It's manageable for most busy cyclists, but still creates the necessary training stimulus. But what if you only have 4 hours available? You can still build an effective aerobic base, but you'll need to be even more focused. Here's a modified approach. I will let you take a screenshot too. This compressed approach still maintains the critical 80-20 balance while fitting into a tighter schedule. There's another critical element that many cyclists miss: progression. Your body adapts to training stress, so you need to gradually increase the challenge to continue seeing improvements. For sweet spot training, the progression typically follows this pattern. First, increase the duration of intervals from 8 minutes to 12 minutes to 20 minutes, then increase the number of intervals. Finally, slightly increase the intensity from 88% to 94% of FTP. For endurance rides, the progression is simpler. Gradually increase the duration of your longest ride, aiming to add about 15 to 30 minutes every 2 weeks. This progressive approach ensures continuous adaptation without overwhelming your recovery capacity. But speaking of recovery, this is where where many busy cyclists sabotage their base training efforts. Recovery isn't just about taking days off. It's about actively facilitating your body's adaptation process. This means proper nutrition, adequate sleep, and stress management. During base training, your body is building new structures, more capillaries, more mitochondria, stronger heart muscle. These adaptations require resources and time. Make sure you're consuming adequate protein, at least 1.6 grams per kilogram or 0.7 grams per pound of body weight daily, and carbohydrates to fuel your training. Prioritize sleep, aiming for 7 to 9 hours per night, and manage non-training stress, which can impair recovery just as much as physical stress. Another key element of effective base training is periodization, organizing your training into focused blocks with built-in recovery. A typical structure is 3 weeks of progressive training, followed by 1 week of reduced volume and intensity to allow for deeper recovery and adaptation. During these recovery weeks, reduce your training volume by about 40%, but maintain the same types of workouts. This keeps the training stimulus while allowing your body to absorb the work you've done. Now, let's address some common questions and challenges that busy cyclists face with this approach. How long should base training last? For most cyclists, 8 to 12 weeks of focused base training is ideal. Less than 8 weeks doesn't allow enough time for the deeper physiological adaptations to occur. More than 12 weeks often leads to motivational challenges and diminishing returns. What is my available training time? Varies week to week. This is reality for many busy professionals. The key is to prioritize quality over quantity. On weeks when you have less time, focus on completing your sweet spot sessions and at least one zone 2 ride. When you have more time, add duration to your endurance rides rather than adding more intensity. Should I do any high-intensity intervals during base phase? Beyond sweet spot work, it's beneficial to include occasional, very short, high-intensity effort, 10 to 30 seconds, to maintain neuromuscular recruitment patterns. These don't create excessive fatigue, but help preserve your ability to generate high power when needed. What about strength training during base phase? Absolutely include it. Strength training 2 to 3 times per week during base phase complements your on-bike work and prevents the muscle loss that can occur with endurance training alone. Focus on compound movements like squats, deadlifts, and core exercises. Even 20 to 30 minutes twice a week can make a significant difference. Let me share a real-world example that brings all these principles together. James was a 42-year-old executive with a demanding job and family commitments. He could consistently train about 5 hours per week, but had plateaued despite years of riding. His previous approach to base training was typical. He'd do as many Zone 2 rides as possible, occasionally adding volume on weekends when time permitted. But his progress was minimal, and he'd often start the race season feeling underprepared. We implemented the sweet spot base approach I've outlined today. 2 focused sweet spot sessions per week, 2 Zone 2 rides, and twice weekly strength training. We carefully periodized his training with recovery weeks and ensured proper progression of both intensity and volume. The results were remarkable. After 10 weeks, his FTP increased from 245 to 278 watts, a 13% improvement that transformed his riding. More importantly, his endurance at lower intensities improved dramatically. He could maintain 200 watts for hours without fatigue, whereas previously, he'd start to struggle after 90 minutes. But the most telling results came during his first group ride of the season. On a climb where he'd previously been dropped, he not only stayed with the lead group but had energy to spare at the top. As he put it, "It felt like I was riding with a motor compared to last year." This transformation didn't require more training time, just smarter training. By applying the principles of sweet spot-based training, proper progression, and adequate recovery, James broke through his plateau despite his limited training time. The key takeaway is this: effective base training isn't about copying what the pros do. It's about applying scientific principles in a way that works for your real-world constraints. The sweet spot approach allows you to build a solid aerobic foundation even with limited training time. As you implement this approach, remember that consistency trumps occasional epic rides. It's better to complete 4 focused 90-minute sessions per week than to do nothing during the week and a single 6-hour ride on Saturday. The steady, progressive application of training stress is what drives adaptation. Also, be patient. The adaptations from base training take time to develop and aren't always immediately noticeable. You might not see dramatic power increases in the first few weeks, but you're building the foundation that will support all your later training. Trust the process and stay consistent. Finally, remember that base training isn't just about building fitness. It's also about building habits and resilience, the discipline of following a structured training plan, the consistency of showing up even when motivation wanes, and the patience to trust the process rather than seeking immediate results. These mental skills are just as valuable as the physiological adaptations you're creating.